Hey everyone, so in today's video I want to talk about why crypto matters. So I've had a lot of friends who are trying to get into crypto, and before they're trying to they kind of get involved with everything, the question is like, why does any of this actually exist, you know? Like, you might have heard about Bitcoin, you've heard probably about like NFTs, maybe DeFi or something along those lines, but it's always just kind of these crazy buzzwords that you hear randomly from crypto people or mainstream media. So in this video, I want to talk about why crypto really matters and why you should care about it as well. So what's interesting about crypto is that it actually started, in my view at least, is more of a political movement. And I'll explain why. So Satoshi Nakamoto, who's a pseudonymous person, created Bitcoin back in 2008. And for those of you who remember, 2008 was also when the global financial crisis happened. So what's interesting about the GFC, right, is that you had a bunch of people, or a lot of the world, who lost a lot of money, but that money was lost because of bankers, and in the end, no one actually was, I guess, jailed or punished for any of this. It was kind of like oh hey, we messed up the financial system by extending way too much debt. Whoops, let's just let a lot of people suffer as a result of this. So the reason why that happened in the first place is because the existing financial system is kind of rigged for two reasons. The first one is that money has no real value. So typically, if you think about like any national currency, like the US dollar, Australian dollar, the pound, the euro, they're not actually backed by anything. The governments can print them at ease. But the second thing which makes this really bad is banks can basically lend out $1 multiple times over. So if the bank has $1, they can lend out the same dollar to 5 different people simultaneously. 5 isn't the exact number, but it depends on the regulation of the country, but it's absurdly high. So you kind of have these two factors, and it's a bit of a clown system. So what happened in 2008, essentially, at a very high level, was that banks were lending money to people for houses, to buy houses, but the people the banks were lending to have basically a rating, and it'd be like a AAA rating down to like a triple C, and there's quite a few grades effectively, but these ratings were given by a ratings agency, and essentially these ratings were all corrupt, and the banks knew they were corrupt, but they were happy lending the money to these people despite knowing that actually there's a lot of corruption in the way the ratings were done. So what kind of happened, to cut a very long story short, you had a lot of money being lent out to people who it should have been lent out to in the first place. And when the kind of musical chair stopped ringing, it was basically everyday people that suffered the consequences of that. And that's kind of like, in a nutshell, how kind of the global financial crisis happened. But at the same time, Bitcoin was created as a result of these two things. And this isn't exact, but this is more of an approximation of like, these are like two critical problems. So you kind of distill these problems down of like, okay, money has no real value and it can be printed whenever a government wants. And the second is banks are corrupt and can lend out the same dollar multiple times. And it's interesting to think about why these two problems haven't been solved. So the first one, about why money has no real value. So essentially, before Bitcoin, anyone who's tried to start their own currency would basically get shot, kidnapped, or sued in court. So if you basically wanted to say, I'm going to start some sort of new legal tender, which you can use to pay for things, it just wasn't possible because you would quite literally get shut down. Then the second problem was that as humans, when we created money, we realized that storing it in a physical way isn't actually that effective, and we need someone else to hold onto it for us. So we needed some sort of bookkeeper, right? Now, the problem with if all of us were to keep track of our own books, right, is imagine we've got 3 people here. And they all start off with one imaginary dollar. Now, imagine they all have their own ledger that has their own records. So if, let's just call this person A, person B, and person C. So if person C wanted to pay B $1, then C would need to record that transaction honestly, and B would need to record that transaction honestly, and A would need to speak to both of these people. Now, if any one of these people makes a mistake or is corrupt, the entire system breaks down, because B could say, well, actually, I didn't receive the dollar, or A could say, well, I didn't see that dollar be given to B, and when B tries to spend it, A will say, well, that's invalid. So to solve this problem of us keeping track of each other's accounts, we as humans essentially created this invention called a bank. And as long as all of us trust that the bank's ledger is correct, we should all be happy. So for many years, or I'd say many hundreds of years, this has kind of been two of the major problems of money throughout existence. Is that A, there's no option to create your own, say, currency, and the second is that banks were given way too much power and were the middlemen for keeping track of this ledger. And what they typically do is lend out money multiple times over. So that being said, Bitcoin was revolutionary because it solved both of these problems simultaneously. And I'll explain how. So what I think people don't realize is Bitcoin is actually the first non-government controlled currency. And when I say currency, like a real currency that has full sovereignty. And it's interesting because it's almost, you could say it's its own economy, but online. There's nothing that can shut it down. There's nothing that can turn it off. It's quite literally indestructible. So that's like the first really big breakthrough of Bitcoin, that it's a political movement which essentially allows anyone to start their own currency. And that's like a really big historical event. Now, the second thing is that because Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer ledger technology, meaning everyone keeps track of their own ledger, and we know that everyone will keep track of the same records because of essentially blockchain technology, we now basically don't need banks. We don't need banks to keep track of records for us. And that's a really, really big improvement, because what happens when you've got your own independently controlled currency and a ledger is that you can basically go back to solving these two problems, which is the first problem, which we described here, is actually, in my view, like kind of the lack of like a monetary policy, right? As in, humans who can control when money should be created or destroyed out of thin air. The whole fundamental around Bitcoin is that there are only 21 million Bitcoins that can ever be created. So there can never be more than that. And that's a really big deal because it's an asset which isn't going to go down because a lot of it was printed. And the second bit, which is banks lending out money, we had to do that because we couldn't keep track of ledgers ourselves. And typically that's known as the double spend problem, where you don't know if someone spent their money twice. So what Bitcoin solves is it solves the double spend problem, so all of us can have our own ledgers, but still ensure that there's the integrity of the system. And that second piece is basically what spawns this massive revolution, where now you can have money that's controlled by essentially the people and is very explicit in how it works. It's not prone to the same kind of flaws that, say, traditional currencies have. Now, the biggest question that people kind of ask is, well, what is Bitcoin backed by? Right? Like, isn't this just kind of imaginary money? Well, that's literally kind of no different to real money. And because real money, or fiat money, because for a better word, isn't backed by anything either. The only thing it's backed by is the fact that whenever you spend fiat money in your local economy, the merchants and the country have to accept that denomination of money. So if it's US dollars, as a shopkeeper, you have to accept this. And that's really what makes fiat currencies or government-controlled currencies valuable. But it's the collective belief of a country at the end of the day. So a really nice way to think about it is like Bitcoin is the collective belief of the internet. And that's a really interesting way of framing it, because now, like, the internet is its own economy, and, like, for lack of a better term, the metaverse, this is basically what people use to denominate value or store their value in, because they know it's a fixed supply currency. So going back to the original question about why crypto matters. Crypto matters because it provides an alternative system that isn't corrupt and has the same flaws as the old financial system. It doesn't solve all the problems, and there's still many issues which crypto as an industry is trying to figure out, but these are roughly some of the principles that really make crypto special and why it is what it is. Now, from 2008, like after Bitcoin was spawned, there's a ton of history that comes after this. There's Ethereum, there's kind of the rise of DeFi, then recently you've had NFTs, and you've got GameFi, you've got alternative layer ones. There's honestly just, it goes on and on. But I'll probably save that for another video. This video is more like a primer of like, here's why people should care, and here's why crypto is a big deal. And yeah, this is more of a beginner video, and haven't really done one of these in a while. So if you enjoyed this and found it helpful, leave me a comment, let me know what you liked or didn't like. And yeah, excited to create more content for you all. See ya.